Start your journey today by liking, subscribing, and sharing our YouTube channel, KnowledgeWell Media, or by going to our Square site at knowledgewell-media.square.site and perusing over the available content and information. Also by submitting your email at the bottom of the Square site page in the Stay in the Loop section to receive priority information, specials, and other insider details. Or by signing up for a 1-hour consultation to tailor your specific educational needs in beginning your journey. You may do so at the aforementioned Square site, once again at knowledgewell-media.square.site. Here are a few other items in demand on our Square site. The Person Defined series, a 9-part video lecture series, comprehensively outlining the scheme to artfully deceive mankind into trading away his birthright, his natural liberties, and inherent rights. Pre-orders for The Yellow Bricks of Emerald, the first edition, offered presently as an ebook only. This book comprehensively uncovers the legal schemes, past, present, and future, of the elite powers and the U.S., subjecting American citizens to servitude and allegiance due to their own ignorance. The KnowledgeWell Video Lecture Series Trust Course, a comprehensive lecture series educating on the history, effects, and administration of the wealth-preserving, asset-protecting, private commercial entity known as a trust. Plus, we have our very own template and instructions to help you set up yours. And, coming soon, our apparel and product store for all things KnowledgeWell, including shirts, hats, jackets, cups, bumper stickers, and more. For all this and much, much more, as well as for any questions or comments, email to knowledgewell4u@gmail.com or go to our Square site at knowledgewell-media.square.site. And now, you've been made free. What are you going to do with it? All right. Come on in. Make sure you let me know how the sound is right off the bat so we can make sure we have quality production here and video quality. Let me know if there's any problems. Welcome to the Day of the Sun. It is August 25th, 2024. We're at the end. Thank you, says BB Production, says looks and sounds great. Awesome. All right, so we'll have an interesting. My bad. Welcome. Let us know where you're hailing from in the comment section. Let's see who our first supporters are in the comment section. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? All right. We're gonna have a great show today. Lots of information, as always. We'll try to break it down the best we can, so that you can actually take something away from here that is conducive and beneficial for you. Let's see who's here. Blue Marvel is 19, or excuse me. Blue Marvel 9 is first in the building, along with BB Productions, KnowledgeWell Media. Happy Amin Ra Day. Okay. All right, Amin Ra Day. All right. Heather Bell is in the building, says greetings and salutations to the family. All right. Thank you for being here, Heather. Always appreciative. BB Production says, don't forget to drop a like as you come on in. Yes, please, please just hit that thumbs up button. Even if you're watching this on replay, it means a great deal to us here as we put it in for you, bringing this hard hitting information. All right. Let's see here. Testing 1, 2. I don't know why I'm not getting any readings, but I have to believe that it is working. Blue Marvel 9 says, this is why I want to leave America, U.S., because America is doomed. All right. Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look. We'll be covering some of that today. We're going to go back and do a little history. And as the title expresses, a nation that forgets their history is doomed. All right. Is doomed to repeat it. All right. All right. Looks and sounds great. Blue Marveled 9 says, listening in from Dallas, Texas, watching and listening in. Heather B checking in from outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. All right. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the house, as well as Dallas, Texas. We have Wisconsin represented here, right here. All right. Come on in. Come on in. Make sure that you share this to your Facebook pages. As well as your other platforms, if you will. Greatly appreciated. Let's see here. Yeah, we're going to do some history today. If you've been paying attention, you know I've been talking a lot about these two factions, these two families, the Delancey family and the Livingston family. So I actually went and got the documents from where I gleaned that information here. So we're going to be going over that with using the document camera to explain a little bit about how we got here. All right. History, again, a nation that forgets their history is doomed to repeat it. We need to know what is really going on. All right. So we're going to work on that today. Don't forget, we also at 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time today, we have our Zoom meeting. All right. So hopefully you have expressed your interest in joining us there. We'll be starting to discuss the actions leading towards the remedy that eludes so many, that people are all out here trying to discover. We want to make sure that the KnowledgeWellians and those who entrust their education here are best positioned to be successful. As you know, the paradigm shift is upon us. It's already happening. It's already taking place. So hopefully you are strategically in position. If not, it would behoove you to get on board with the KnowledgeWellians as we display, convey, and teach and instruct upon the avenues in line with legally protectable interest, in line with positive law. A lot of people are trying to check out. I contend that that's not the way to go. That could potentially work for someone who does not aspire to stay here. All right. Here being the United States. But if you intend to be here, you know the saying, if you can't beat them, sometimes you got to join them. All right. Well, let me not go too fast. Let me not go too fast. All right. Got me ready to start already. Milwaukee, Wisconsin represented. Okay. Very good. Thank you all for being here. Looking forward to the rest of the family joining us soon. Blue Marvel 9 states, I'm currently getting into truth, sovereignty, and godhood. All right. All right. Very good. Very good. Very good. Thank you all for being here. And just wanted to remind you, don't forget to contact us here. You can always hit us up at the knowledgewell4u@gmail.com that you're seeing there on your bottom. What would that be? Your left? Yeah. Corner. You can reach us there at any point in time. If you've got a question, if you need a consultation, that's the way to do that there. Also, Let's see what else we got for you. Also, we covet your donations, whether large or small. You can do so at our Cash App. Scrolling across the bottom of the screen is the $ American Consulate. That is our Cash App. We covet any little or big thing that you are able to do to support us, to keep us on the air, keep us doing what we love to do, keep us passionate. Okay. All right. So we appreciate that. Also, okay, we already got the email. We also have our Square site where you can pick up things like the t-shirt that I'm wearing and others. We now have our 777 t-shirt. We now have our 777 mug and things. So that's just a great way to support, show your appreciation, and value is defined as the amount someone is willing to pay for something. So if you find value here, then support us in that way. All right. So you can visit over at the Square site right there. All right, KnowledgeWell media.square.site. All right, that is our official website where you can pick up products as well as video archives going to different topics. We also have our Patreon, which is we're stoking the flames of the Patreon, getting that ready to go. So lots to do, but there we already have videos from the past and things that we have uploaded there that we did not want to put into the public because of the level of disclosure. I'll put it that way. All right. So if you want access to that level of disclosure in the private, then it would behoove you to become a member of the Patreon. So feel free to go and check it out, see if that's something you're interested in. All right. And as always, lastly, but not least important, is the fact that nothing you hear today is intended to be legal advice. If you need legal advice, then please seek yourself a competent attorney. All right. This platform is for educational purposes only. All right. Please be advised. All right. Now that we got the business out of the way, looking at the comment section. Okay. BB Productions is doing a bang up job of putting all of the links in the comment section. So please peruse through there. Thank you for that, BB Productions. All right. And we have 6 people watching. We have 5 thumbs up. Would somebody please balance us out? Greatly appreciate that. It helps us with the algorithm and our relevance. All right. Again, happy Sunday, Day of the Sun, August the 25th, 2024. It is now 11:15 Central Standard Time. We're going to be doing a bit of reading to jump us off here. So grab your cup of hot cocoa and, your zooms and wham, sit back, relax. If you're crocheting or whatever, feel free. As long as you can hear, that's all that matters. So we're going to have story time just for a moment. We'll pick out the players in our history. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. And then we'll do, as we normally do, break down that understanding for you. So hopefully my voice is not too annoying for you to hear what we are going to be reading. I'll also put it up on the document camera so that you can follow along. If you have any comments or questions at any point in time during the reading, please feel free to put it in the comment section. I will be monitoring that as well as BB Productions, and we can stop and discuss. All right. Or if you find that you can point something out that is very relevant that we should take a pause on and discuss, then please let me know. All right. Don't go away now. It's story time. All right. So we're going to, the title of the document we're going to be started reading from is Provincial Partisanship. All right. Internal Colonial Politics and the Coming of the American Revolution in New York. Okay. I'll try not to make this too boring. I'll try to pep it up a little bit, but again, if we do not know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. All right. So you'll see a lot of the players that led to where we are today. Let's see what else. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anything. How do I want to do this? One moment. All right. So you should be able to see that there. And this document is by Peter, as you can see, Brodkin. Mr. Brodkin is a graduate student in history at Rutgers University. Again, the title, Provincial Partisanship internal colonial politics, and the coming of the American Revolution in New York. Okay. It says, during the fall and winter of 1765, New York City was one of the hotbeds of colonial resistance against parliamentary legislation. New York's merchants became the first in the North American colonies to enter into a non-importation agreement as a means of opposing the stamp tax. All right, I'll let me see. Did I pull that up? I believe I pulled that up. Let me see. I want to make sure that you get a great understanding. So I don't want to gloss over anything, to make sure that you understand what is going on here. Let's see if I can share this here. Yeah, let's do this. We'll do this here. All right. So what is the Stamp Act tax? I'll zoom in. All right. It says Stamp Act 1765. In U.S. colonial history, first British parliamentary attempt to raise revenue through direct taxation of all colonial, commercial, and legal papers, newspapers, pamphlets, cards, almanacs, and even dice. The devastating effect of Pontiac's War, a colonial frontier settlement added to enormous new defense burdens resulting from Great Britain's victory, 1763, in the French and Indian War. All right. Let's see if there's anything else here. Completely unexpected was the avalanche of the protest from the colonists, who effectively nullified the Stamp Act by outright refusal to use the stamps, as well as by riots, stamp burning, and intimidation of colonial stamp distributors. Okay. It's Sons of Liberty. We're going to cover all of this in our reading. I just want to give you context. All right. The Sons of Liberty, we're going to cover them, formed in, it looks like it cuts off here, opposed the act and destroyed the stamps wherever they encountered them. In addition to tarring and feathering stamp agents, the Sons of Liberty sacked homes and warehouses of the wealthy, whom they presumed were favorites of the royal governors. Okay. All right, we're going to stop with that right there and get back to our reading so we don't get too deep without context. Okay. So that's the stamp tax. Okay. Again, it says that New York City was one of the hotbeds of colonial resistance against parliamentary legislation. New York's merchants became the first in the North American colonies to enter into a non-importation agreement as a means of opposing the stamp tax. Hoping to spread their ideas of resistance, the New York Sons of Liberty, there they are again, or Liberty Boys, as they were often called, established one of the first committees of correspondence. Even Boston seemed to be lagging behind New York's leadership in the boycott movement. What were they boycotting? The Stamp Act, right? Stamp Tax Act. So the Sons of Liberty, New York City. Okay. The Boston radicals had a formidable foe in a number of wealthy merchants, whereas the New Yorkers had no such adversary. This is not to say that there were no royal supporters in New York, but the leading families of the province and the city, while not all backing the radical methods of the Sons of Liberty, at least moderately supported or participated in attempts to do away with the stamp tax. Some of the colony's elite, like the Delancey family, that's one of the families I had mentioned to you before, if you recall, Welcome, Terry Camp. Thank you for being here. She says 777. Very good. I feel myself getting stronger. We're doing a little bit of history reading. How we got to where we are. Okay. Oh, am I not showing? Okay. Okay. So some of the colony's elite. Okay. Let's put things into context. Remember, I talked about these two families here. I contend that this is where our politics came from. Greetings to you, sister. Thank you for being here. Kimberly Miller. Greetings to you. So we're talking about the Delancey family and the Livingstons. The Livingstons. Okay. This is where your political, their bipartisan partisanship came from, and that's what we're covering. The provincial partisanship. You see it right there about the colonial politics and the coming of the American Revolution in New York. They're going to be focusing on New York and Boston for right now. All right, let's get back to it. Some of the colony's elite, like the Delancey family, okay, took the more radical approach of supporting the extra legal mob activities of the Sons of Liberty, meaning these were that group, okay, that radical group that were opposing the Parliament or Great Britain's Stamp Act, a tax levied against the colonies. Others, primarily the Livingstons, took more moderate. So you have your radicals, the Delancey family, and you have the moderate Livingstons. Okay. Steps towards to work within the legal process. The Livingstons worked within the legal process. The Delanceys were more radical. Okay. Using petitions to Parliament. Okay, they were using the democratic or the legal processes to petition Parliament and whatever other influence they had on the English merchants. We're going to learn more about these too. Remember, the merchant class I had told you previously were the Delancey family. The Livingstons went into what's known as the landed gentry. They went into plantation ownership and what have you. This is who I claim the Bush line came out of. And the Delanceys is more of your radical, at this time, probably your Democrat side. So Republican, Democrat. Okay, we'll see if I'm correct there. We'll fact check that in a moment. Okay. And whatever. Okay. So the Livingstons hoped that these merchants would then call for repeal of the stamp tax. The merchant class you're going to learn I shouldn't get ahead of myself. Just bear with me. We'll get into it. Okay. Turning the page on history. Literally. All right, let's keep going. Yet, despite early signs of leadership, New York did not remain in the forefront of colonial resistance. In only 4 short years, the radicals and moderates of the province, that's the Delanceys and the Livingstons, found themselves mired in internal conflict that diffused and dissipated their insurgent impulse. So, in other words, instead of focusing on the stamp tax and working in unity against, Great Britain's imposition of that tax on the colonies, it says that they started an internal issue. They were mired in internal conflict that in turn diffused and dissipated their insurgent impulse. Doesn't that sound a lot like today? If the people only realized and knew that we are stronger together instead of being so divided, and we focused on the real issue, right? If we only did that, then we'd be stronger. But alas, this division, okay, that we're focused, the powers that be basically get us to focus on race and gender and what have you. And what does that cause? It'll diffuse and dissipate your impulse against government overreach or certain factions who are trying to use influence power to basically divide us.
Okay, so you see that's what's happening here, even in the colonies, even back here in the early 1800 or 18th century. All right, so let's go. New York's radicals had not lost, that's the Delancey family, remember? The radical side. Radicals had not lost their interest in opposing British actions that they viewed as infringements on their rights, talking about that stamp tax. However, other more immediate intra-provincial interests took precedence, meaning what was going on in the colonies. They're saying that that's more important, okay, over the colonial British friction. What these other interests were and the place of importance they held for both the colony's leading families and the leadership of its radical movement are essential questions for an understanding of the nature, listen, of the American struggle for independence. When asking the question, how revolutionary was the American Revolution, we cannot stop with discussions about Whig ideology, resistance to English mercantilism. Oh, this is going to get good. This is going to get good. Because remember that scripture I read in Ezekiel 28, talking about the Prince of Tyre and how due to his trading, his trafficking, remember? And people, you know, that he was corrupted, or that figurative king or whatever was corrupted because of the abundance of his trading. Okay, we'll get into it. Mercantilism, right? So the Whig ideology, resistance to English mercantilism, and middle class democracy. These factors only set the stage. Okay, they all may be important, but they are certainly not sufficient explanations for the coming revolution in America, because they do not deal with at least one important problem. Given two similar seaports, New York and Boston, each leaders in the resistance against the reawakened British interest in colonial affairs after 1763, why did one remain a leader and the other not? Okay, so this is the considerations. Okay, with at least one important problem given to similar seaport. Okay, while Boston's radical activity in time made it the target of special repressive parliamentary legislation. When they're saying parliamentary, they're talking about Great Britain. Okay, while Boston's radical activity in time made it the target of special repressive parliamentary legislation, the New York Assembly, by comparison, let me make sure I move this up, became more obsequious and voted money for the funding of the Quartering Act in 1769. While the Boston area saw the first military action of the war and was the first region abandoned by the British men in arms. Let me go back here just to bring some context. So, New York Assembly, in distinction from Boston, says they voted money for the funding of the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act had to do with, the basically Great Britain's mandate that the troops, essentially have lodging or whatever, right, in the colonies, and that basically they were going to be taxed, to support providing the quarters for the military for Great Britain. Okay, it's along those lines. Like, it was actually a mandate, which is now outlawed. It's not, you can't the government can't demand that you quarter troops anymore. Okay, later for that. While the Boston area saw the first military action of the war and was the first region abandoned by the British men in arms. See, New York became England's military capital during the war for independence. What? Listen. New York became England's military capital during the war for independence. The intent of this study is to begin to deal with New York City during the years leading up to the revolution and to suggest some of the factors which moved New York from a center of stamp tax radicalism to a loyalist stronghold. Loyalist to whom? England. Okay? This will make sense. Just bear with me. We're laying down the context. This is the introduction. The initial step toward an understanding of the pre-Revolutionary War chronology in New York is to understand a few basic concepts that shaped the province's politics. Which province? New York's province. This is what shaped their politics. Study of government. First and foremost, it must be understood that all political activity during the last 2 decades preceding the war for independence reflected the partisan split and leadership of the Delancey and Livingston family. You want to know your history? You want to know where politics originated? Here you go. Anybody talking about that? Huh? These are the 2 families. That's why you say 2 wings of the same bird. Delancey's and the Livingston family. What did it say? First and foremost, it must be understood that all political activity during the last 2 decades preceding the war for independence. When was the War of Independence? Was that 1777? Somewhere around there? Listen, or that's when they won their independence? Okay, whatever. All political activity reflected the partisan split. That's what it's all about. And leadership of these 2 families. People. Blue Marvel says 1776. Thank you for that. Thank you for that information and confirmation. Kimberly Miller says, wow, this is why the UN is in New York. Uh-oh. You better watch out, sis. Don't be putting you better stay out of their businesses. Let me do the trouble. I'll get in trouble. You just all right, here we go. I'm just joking. All political activity. All political activity, okay, reflects the partisan split and leadership of the Delancey and Livingston family. Now y'all got to do your homework and go dive deeper into these 2 families, don't you? Should uncover a lot, because this is what it's all about. The Livingston faction represented the interest of the, I told you, landed gentry seated north of New York City along the Hudson River, and as well as the Presbyterian Church. Oh, y'all want real history? Y'all want to know what's really going on? 777. Copper G said, just missed it, huh? Oh, I'm in there. Yeah, 1776. Hey, but 1777, we can look into that and see what was really going on. I think I covered that last time we went live. But anyways, I digress. This is going to get fun. Watch this, y'all. Let's take a trip down history. Put your thinking caps on. Let's go to make-believe, the land of make-believe, and look back at our history, at the history of the United States, uncover this stuff so that we can understand today and what's coming. History repeats itself. So all you got to do is learn the history, and then you'll be that much further ahead at what they're enacting even in the present day. So it's worth having this little story time here, y'all. Let's just have story time. This is just us family. Anybody else wants to get involved, they can get involved. Don't forget, we do have our 2:30 Central Standard Time Zoom. So we will be sending that link out to you if it's not already sent right before. That's just to keep a cap on anybody that tries to sneak in. So we will be sending that link out. We look forward to having that meeting with our family and our friends that are of interest. All right. So if you are interested in joining us at the meeting, at the Zoom meeting today, discussing remedy, and learning those esoteric things that ultimately will lead to true freedom. Join us today. And if you're interested, you'll hit us up at the KnowledgeWell for you at gmail.com, which is right here somewhere on the screen, about right there. Ding, 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 ding. KnowledgeWell for you at gmail.com is the email if you would like to take part in our Zoom at 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time today. That's the way that you get the link. Just express your interest, okay? All right, going forward in our reading of history. True American history. All right. Let's talk about the Livingston family, which again were more of the what did they say? Not the radical, but more of the, what did they call them? The Livingston faction represented the interest of the landed gentry. Let's get some context. All right, let's look up landed gentry. Give me one moment. So that we can know exactly what the Livingston side was into. And we will also be discussing the Delancey side, likewise. All right, let me share my screen here. Oh, I meant to do it a different way, but that's okay. All right, the landed gentry were a class of people in early modern British society. Where did the Livingstons come from? British society, who didn't have to work for a living and were not part of the peerage. They were untitled aristocrats. Who made their living from what? Rents of properties, farms, and buildings, but not from economic trade. That is very key, very important. Please do not forget that. They were strictly in the business of property, rents of properties, farms, and buildings. That's the landed gentry. That's that class of people. Okay? That's very vital and very important. The landed gentry were also considered members of the non-peerage nobility, below those who had received baronage or dukedoms. The term was originally used to describe upper-class members who were both landlords and commoners. But by the late 19th century, it also included peers who lived on landed estates. The landed gentry included classes of men such as knights, gentlemen, and baronets, as well as the male descendants of peers and the children of peeresses. The term landed gentry has been used in other countries as well, including China and Palestine. Okay, I think that's good. The landed gentry in England. All right, hold on. I'm getting a notification here. Let me, one moment. All right, one moment. Okay, so here we go. Landed gentry. I got a lot of buttons to push here. Please bear with me. The landed gentry in England were individuals who were part of the gentry class, but were also landowners. These individuals were well-born and of high societal status. Landed gentry could maintain their social status purely from the passive rental income obtained from their land. All right, we have context? We have context. All right, let's get back to it. Let's get back to it. Is this good? Hopefully this is good. We're putting us into context. It's imperative that we understand this, okay? All right, let me get back here. All right. All right, so again, this is your landed gentry class. They were in rents and properties, and they didn't have to work. They had passive income from the rents. Okay, they were landlords. Okay, plantation owners, the Livingston. Okay, the Livingston faction represented the interest of the landed gentry seated north of New York along the Hudson River, as well as the Presbyterian Church. These are the progenitors, the practitioners, what have you, of the Presbyterian Church. That's your Livingstons. Get to know these people of these individuals of history, y'all. This is very vital and very important. The Delancey's strength was among who? The merchants of New York City. And which church? The Anglican. Let me see. Yep. Anglican Church. Okay. So what two classes of people do we have thus far, y'all? We have the landed gentry. That's property, lands, right? Landlords, passive income. And we have the merchant class now, which are the Delanceys. Are you picking up what we're putting down here? I'm giving it to you. This is the true history. This is what we're talking about. We can, we could talk all we want to about the merchant class or a maritime law and all that kind of stuff, but why don't we get to know the players and their influence upon the American colony or the British colonies, later to be the American colonies, right? Let's get to know what's really going on behind the scenes. All right, let's do it. And so with that being said, we have the Presbyterian Church and we have now the Anglican Church, the Delanceys. This is not to say that there were no Delancey landholders, or that no Livingstons were involved in trade. Okay, but we know the let's say the progenitors of the mercantile class or mercantilism were the Delanceys. That was trade, merchandise and trade. Those are the forefathers. The Livingstons, again, landed gentry, the forefathers of plantation ownership, lands, properties, etc., estates. What is important is that the Delancey landholders and land speculators viewed such operations as secondary to their mercantile interest. Okay? They held trade, commerce and trade more importantly than land ownership, is what they're saying. While the Livingston merchants and lawyers, okay, some of the Livingstons participated in mercantilism. That's what it's saying. And being lawyers. You want to know where this practice came from? We're going to go into that just a hair because we're going to have to do another part to start to introduce the legal system and the progenitors of that legal system and their effect on American history. It's very, very significant how they established this and the purpose for which they established the the American jurisprudence. Oh, yes, it's going to get very rich. Okay, so Livingston merchants and lawyers still felt a strong attachment to Livingston Manor and the interests of the landed class. Okay, that's a class of people. Especially important were the religious affiliations because they were central to each faction's orientation. Okay, what? The religious affiliation. Remember, it's the Presbyterians and the Anglican churches. Okay, it was central to the factions. What are the factions? The two families. You ever watch the Hunger Games? Oh yeah, this is all very relevant. They've been putting it in our face the whole time. You have to understand the factions, who the factions were. That's the Delancey family and the Livingstons family. Okay, orientation. Okay, so the Livingstons were, by and large, the representatives of which church? The Presbyterian Dutch interest and the old Dutch families who were still very powerful in the Hudson Valley. The Delanceys, Anglicanism was part of their representation of the English interests in New York City. Very important to understand. These are the two factions that started everything that you now know involving the United States and of America. Okay? Again, the Livingstons, by and large, the representatives of the Presbyterian Dutch interest, Okay, this is what they were representing. And the old Dutch families who were still very powerful in the Hudson Valley. Okay, and the Delanceys, again, in contrast, Anglicanism was part of their representation of the English interest in New York City. They were representing the English in New York City. Okay, the Delanceys. All right. During most of the 1750s, the Delancey family was the more powerful faction in the colony's politics because of the leadership of, here he is, James Delancey Sr. James Delancey Sr., who was the lieutenant governor. Okay. This is the Delancey side. This is the radical side, Sons of Liberty side. His faction benefited through patronage. This is, again, the mercantile side. Patronage from his influence with the royal governor and the home office. This is back in England, Great Britain, what have you. Okay. Through his patronage from his influence with the royal governor. So Delancey, okay, enjoyed patronage and had great influence with the royal governor back home in England at the home office. Okay, that's the Delanceys, the radicals. What else could be said? That's the mercantilism, the merchant class. Okay, these circumstances were drastically altered in 1760 with the death of James Delancey Sr. Okay, let me give you a little backstory on Mr. Delancey here. All right, let's see what I got for you. All right, where was he at? Tories colonized. I know I had pulled him up. Where are you? Just bear with me one moment. Oh, boy. One moment. I'll be right with you. Let me look, see if I can find it here. All right, here we are. I think this is it right here. Yep. Okay. I got it. Let's share the screen. Oh, that's not it. One moment. All right. So Mr. James Delancey, let's look at this radical side, the mercantilism side, the merchant class, in contrast with the Livingstons, who were more moderate, who were into landed gentry. So it says James Delancey, okay, November 27th, 1703 till July 30th, 1760, which is when he perished, served as Chief Justice. So he was a Chief Justice, Lieutenant Governor, and acting colonial governor of the province of New York. Okay. So that's consistent thus far in our reading. The first son of, okay, I'm not going to go into that. Let's see. Give you a little backstory. James went to England for his schooling and to Corpus Christi College, Cambridge. Okay. Studying what? Law at where? The Inner Temple, London. I got some backstory on that. That's going to be interesting in relation to the institution of the American jurisprudence, the legal order here in the United States, the Inner Temple, London. Okay. Having been admitted to the bar, there's the bar, in 1725, he returned to New York to practice law and enter politics. Let's see what else I got for you here. 1731, he was appointed as second justice of the Supreme Court of New York. Okay. Let's see. He framed a new charter for the city of New York. Let's see what else I can give you. appointed to the governor's council. All right, now let's take a look here at that inner temple. Give you some backstory on that. No worries. We're just laying foundation so you can connect the dots. The Honorable Society of the Inner Temple, commonly known as the Inner Temple, is one of the 4 inns of court and is a professional association of what? Barristers. Barristers. That's your bar member. It's a type of lawyer in a common law jurisdiction. Okay, which England, that's where we got our English, the common law from, England. Okay, barristers mostly specialize in courtroom advocacy and litigation. Their tasks include arguing cases in courts and tribunals, drafting legal pleadings, researching the law, and giving legal opinions. Okay, that's barristers. Okay, and judges. To be called to the bar and practice as a barrister in England and Wales, a person must belong to one of these inns. There's how many inns? 4 inns. We're talking about the Inner Temple right now. It is located in the wider temple area near the Royal Courts of Justice and within the city, you've heard of this, the City of London, okay, as a liberty. It functions largely as an independent local government authority. The inn is a professional body that provides what? Legal training, selection, and regulation for members. It is ruled by a governing council called what? Parliament. Okay. Oh, shoot. I just did that, didn't I? One moment. That's the Parliament, made up of the masters of the bench or benchers and led by the treasurer, who is elected to serve a 1-year term. The temple takes its name from the Knights Templar. You've heard of that before. Okay. Who originally, until their abolition in 1312, leased the land to the temple's inhabitants, the Templars. Okay, the Inner Temple was a distinct society from at least 1388. Although, as with all the inns of court, its precise date of founding is not known. After a disreputed early period during which the temple was almost entirely destroyed, and the peasants revolted against the temple. Okay, it flourished, becoming the second largest inn during the Elizabethan period. Okay, and then you can I'll let you go ahead and do your due diligence in reading more into the Inner Temple. But the important part of that is that James Delancey, who we are studying on at this particular time, was a member, it says, of that Inner Temple. Okay, for context purposes. It says here, studying law at the Inner Temple, London. Okay, having been admitted to the bar in 1725. Then he returned to New York, which is where our story is picking up our history lesson here that we're having now. Okay, so just for context. Okay, so again, where were we at? Okay, it says, again, back to the religious affiliations. Okay, because they were central to each faction's orientations. The Livingstons were by and large the representative of the Presbyterian Dutch interest and the old Dutch families who were still very powerful in the Hudson. The Delanceys, under Mr. Delancey that we just looked at, Anglicanism was part of their representation of the English interest in New York City. Remember, he returned to New York City after studying abroad in the Inner Temple. During most of the 1750s, the Delancey's family was the more powerful faction in the colony's politics because of the leadership of James Delancey Sr., okay, who was the lieutenant governor. His faction benefited through patronage from his influence with the royal governor and the Home Office. These circumstances were drastically altered in 1760 with the death of James Delancey. So he perished in 1760. And the accession of Cadwallader Colden to the vacant position. So someone else stepped into the position, after which the Livingstons, through their majority in the colonial assembly, became the dominant party So you see how these factions, these parties are being formed, and their influence upon American colonialism or the American colonies. Okay. James Delancey perishes and dies at 1760. Then Cadwalader steps in. Okay. And the Livingstons had a majority in the colonial assembly, the assembly of the colonies. Okay. Became the dominant party for the next 9 years. Okay. So 1760-ish to 1769. The Delanceys, through the leadership of James Delancey Jr., okay, so the son stepped into position, left no political stone unturned in their attempt to regain their supremacy in New York's provincial politics. An attempt to discuss the composition of an urban mob whose activities seem to have had political overtones is the next important prerequisite in understanding New York's provincial politics in the 1760s. Unfortunately, this is quite difficult. Carl Becker, in the history, turning the page on history, of political parties in the province of New York, calls them mechanics, which is almost a non-definition because mechanics could be members of almost every trade, and some could even be moderately wealthy. Pauline Meyer's middle-class mob in popular uprisings and civil authority in 18th century America is also an unsatisfactory picture of the New York rioters. Not only are her own examples of the middle class and well-to-do rioters actually only a small part of the membership of the mobs she discusses, but the people she describes are the kinds of individuals who could be expected to leave written records. Okay. No such materials are available from the participants in New York's mob. And unless those documents have been lost, we must assume that these kinds of individuals do not accurately represent the mob's membership. Only Jesse Lemish in Jack Tar in the Streets seems willing to use the one piece of evidence left to us. In 2 letters to the Home Office being England, Great Britain, General Gage, the British military commander in New York, described the mob's membership as being largely composed of sailors, although this is the merchant class, right? Sailors. Although there is little other hard evidence, these sailors were probably also joined by other day laborers in the city of New York, most of whom were involved in economic pursuits related to shipping. Okay. Trade and the production of craft goods. Okay. So shipping, Delancey's had the monopoly on the shipping trade, the mercantilism, remember? Okay. So these sailors and other day laborers in the city of New York, most of whom were involved in economic pursuits, okay, related to shipping. Unfortunately, Lemish seems to have read only the first part of the Gage letters when he asserts that these sailors led themselves in a kind of Marxian proletarian uprising. Okay, we'll get into that. Don't be dissuaded by that. It's not a problem. This insurrection is composed of great numbers of sailors headed by captains of privateers. We're going to get into this right here. This is very important, understanding mercantilism, the merchant trade, the Delancey monopoly, et cetera, in relation to the American colonies, the British colonies, et cetera, okay? Just stay with me here. We're laying context. All right. So by captains, okay, and other ships. The sailors, who are the only people who may be styled mob, are entirely at the command of the merchants, okay, who employ them. Okay. I did look up privateer. Let me give you context here real quick. So again, this insurrection is composed of a great number of sailors headed by captains of privateers. What's a privateer and other ships? This is important. Let's look at it. So privateers. This is very interesting. Watch this. What's a privateer? In accordance with Britannica, okay, history, privateer, privately owned armed vessel. Check this out, y'all. And this is going to lead us into essentially the discussion on the what are known as the barristers, the legal practitioners, the lawyers, et cetera, into the American history and their significance. Its significance. Okay, so watch this. What's a privateer? Privately owned armed vessel commissioned by a belligerent state to attack enemy ships, usually vessels of commerce. That's what it's a privately owned armed vessel, and they get a commission from a belligerent state such as England. Okay, watch this. Usually vessels of commerce. This is all about commerce, commercial trade, et cetera, et cetera. So remember, who had the monopoly on mercantilism and the merchant transactions and what have you? The Delancey family. Watch this. And these were the radicals. Now watch this. Oh, let me see here. Privateering was carried on by all nations from the earliest times until the 19th century. Not too long ago. Crews were not paid by the commissioning government, but were entitled to cruise for their own profit. What does this remind you of? Even today, what does this remind you of? Let me hip you to this. What do police officers call their automobiles? The automobiles that they mark up. What do they call them? Are they called police cruisers? Pay attention. We're talking mercantilism, the merchant class. So it says that the crews, these privateers, were not paid by the government. Are the police paid by the government? But were entitled to cruise for their own profit. Private organization, private administration, whatever they capture, they can sell, they can impound. Whatever they capture, they get to keep. That's how they get paid. They don't get paid from the government. I'm just saying. Look, with crew members receiving portions of the value of any cargo or shipping that they could wrest from the original owners. So essentially, the privateers would basically capture cargo and what have you, pull you over on the side of the road. Oh, let me not go there. Yeah, never mind. Y'all ain't ready for that. All right. So frequently, it was impossible to restrain the activities of privateers within the legitimate bounds laid down in their commission. Thus, it often became difficult to distinguish between privateers, pirates, corsairs, I think that is, or buccaneers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What's up? Many of whom sailed without a genuine commission. So it was hard to distinguish between the two because it was hard to pin them down. It says it was impossible to restrain the activities. Okay. And they had a commission, from the king or from England to do what they did. Okay. The other ones did not. Buccaneers, pirates did not. Right. In the late 16th century, English privateers such as Sir John Hawkins and Sir Francis Drake, you've heard of him, were encouraged or restrained according to prevailing political conditions. Okay, so whatever the acts or whatever that the king would levy or whatever, they would either be restrained or they would be encouraged based upon that to prevailing political conditions. With the growth of a regular navy, however, the British Admiralty began to discourage privateering because it was more popular among sailors than was serving in the navy at this. Okay, so you get that. At this same period, Dutch sea beggars and French Huguenots, privateers were active. Okay. Throughout the 17th century, English buccaneers in the West Indies, such as Sir Henry Morgan, sometimes sailed as a genuine privateers. Okay, let me see. There was something I think I wanted to get here. The popularity of privateering. Come on now. The popularity of privateering continued in the War of 1812 between Great Britain and the United States. Listen to this. When, for example, the U.S. brig Yankee alone seized or destroyed $5 million worth of English property. France used many privateers during French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Look, in 1857, by the Declaration of Paris, Great Britain and the other major European countries, except Spain, declared privateering illegal. The U.S. government refused to accede, holding that the small size of its navy made reliance on privateering necessary in time of war. The rise of the American Navy at the end of the 19th century and the realization that privateering belonged to an earlier form of warfare prompted the United States to recognize the necessity of finally abolishing it. Spain agreed to the ban in 1908. I wanted to get to something here. One moment. The armed merchant ships must be listed. Okay. I wanted to talk about that merchant class, but you know what? Let's get back to our reading. I don't want to get too far off track. All right, one moment. It'll come back to me. So, where were we at? I should have marked it. This insurrection is composed of great numbers of sailors headed by captains of privateers and other ships. The sailors who are the only people who may be styled mob are entirely at the command of the merchants who employed them. These ship captains, the most important of whom were Isaac Sears and Alexander McDougall. You've heard of these characters, I'm sure, at least this one, okay? Represented a distinct, important, emerging group in the New York political arena. They were newly wealthy. Okay, we're talking about these ship captains. Okay, this mob in New York. Okay, the sailors. Okay, follow along. The merchant class, under the merchant class, who employed them. Okay, let's turn the page on history. Okay, been very successful both as privateers and smugglers during the final colonial war with France. Prior to their meteoric rise into the ranks of the wealthy, these men were possibly as poor as those rioters they later led. The ship captains, or street leaders, unquote, as they were sometimes called, must be viewed as highly motivated men with strong desires for personal upward mobility. During the middle of the 1760s, the energies they used to acquire their wealth were transferred into a desire to improve themselves politically. Finally, we must discuss the Sons of Liberty, an organization which took shape during the early days of what? The Stamp Act crisis. We remember we went over that, where Great Britain had levied a tax on papers, legal papers, dice, and what have you, right? Newspapers. Two elements of this group, talking about the Sons of Liberty, okay, were the crowd and their street leaders. Remember who the street leaders were? I think it said back here. That was another term. Where was it at? I just saw it here. One moment. Oh, right here. The ship's captains. That's who the street leaders are, as they were sometimes called. Okay, highly motivated men with strong desires for upward mobility. Okay, so finally we must discuss the Sons of Liberty. Okay, an organization which took shape during the early days of the Stamp Act crisis. Two elements of this group, the Sons of Liberty, were the crowd and their street leaders. The street leaders, again, were the ship captains. The third element consisted of members of both political factions. The most prominent of these individuals were, once again, James Delancey. This is Junior. Remember, Senior died in 1960. and the so-called Livingston triumvirates. William Livingston, this is made up of William Livingston, John Moran Scott, and William Smith Jr. Both families had reasons to favor the Liberty Boys' resistance against the Stamp Act. So both of these political establishing factions, both of these families, the Delanceys and the Livingstons, both had reason to favor the Liberty Boys' resistance against the Stamp Act. That was Great Britain's act, right? Against the Stamp Act. British parliamentary action was hurting trade and commerce. Who was heading up over trade and commerce? The Delancey family, right? It therefore affected the main basis for the Delancey's wealth. See, what was the main basis for Delancey's wealth? Trade and commerce, the mercantilism class. The Livingstons' financial base, was in less jeopardy. Why? Because they were in the landed gentry, real estate, plantations, right? They had passive income. Remember, they collected rents. They didn't have to work like that. Okay? So they were in less jeopardy. This probably explains their more moderate actions. So the Livingstons were moderate. The Delanceys, again, were more radical. However, they were still interested in opposing the stamp tax, since some members did have shipping investments. Some of the Livingstons were mixed and mingled into mercantilism, is what it's saying. One might also assume that their Dutch background would make them somewhat hostile to English action on general principles. It is also interesting to note that the family in political power in the provincial assembly took the more moderate stance, meaning the Livingstons, okay? While the faction out of power was the more radical, that's the Delancey. The strong Delancey support of the Sons of Liberty could have, one moment, turning the page on history, been prompted by their need for a constituency and an issue to regain the political leadership they had lost in the 1760s. Okay, so the Delanceys had lost their political influence and leadership in the 1760s. In his essay, quote, Liberty Boys and Mechanics, that's the name of the essay, Liberty Boys and Mechanics of New York City, Roger Champagne states the result was an alliance to defeat British policies. Alliance between who? The Delanceys and the Livingstons, right? And to serve the needs of local politics. Local where? Talking about New York. Okay, so they formed an alliance to defeat British policies, including the Stamp Act or Stamp Tax Act, right? To serve the needs of the local politics. Even before Parliament considered a stamp tax, the city of New York held strong undercurrents of dissatisfaction with British imperial policies. The early 1760s witnessed a drastic economic decline after much prosperity during the French and Indian War. This business slump, talking about their local politics here in New York, I believe. Wait, let me see. Even before Parliament considered a stamp tax, the city of New York held strong undercurrents of dissatisfaction with British imperial policies. The early 1760s witnessed a drastic economic decline after much prosperity during the French and Indian War. This business slump, although mostly the result of an economy that had been crippled by the close of the war with France, was heightened by English legislation concerning taxes and currency. So in other words, they're saying during the wartime, the local New York and what have you, the colonies had experienced great wealth and prosperity. Okay. But then there was a decline. Why? The result of an economy that had been crippled by the close of the war. See, war brings a lot of money. It brings a lot of money. And when that war closed, their economy went down. There was a slump in their economy. And that was also heightened by English legislation, that those tax acts and what have you also, and currency. Because of this, many inhabitants of New York viewed their plight as resulting from British action rather than from natural peacetime decline after wartime prosperity. Okay. So they looked to the king and said, it's your fault that our economy is slumping. Okay. Rather than the realization that, well, we're not at wartime. So we're not making as much anymore. Right. We're not making as much. During the last colonial war with France, the merchants of New York were playing both ends against the middle. Listen, y'all. Hear this. This is the results of of politics. It'll seem this way even in today's realization and consideration. Watch this. Who was playing both sides? I'm just going to go out there on a limb. We're going to do a deeper study into the legal order, into the lawyers, into the bar members, but this is where they derived. You're just going to have to trust me on that for the moment. You'll kind of see some of their tactics, some of the legal orders tactics in some of this reading, and you'll be able to hopefully recognize it. But look what's happening here. If my contention is correct, and I'm saying that the merchant class produced what we know as the law merchants and all that kind of stuff, and the legal practitioners, the barristers and what have you, then look what they were doing. During the last colonial war with France, so Great Britain with France, the merchants, these are the ones that hired the privateers. What did the privateers do? They were like your, how should I put it? They were like a secret, like they did like CIA type stuff. Maybe not as severe, but they did stuff like secret operations. They would infiltrate. They would go and steal, or go and get the cargo and things like that. You're going to see here in a moment. They would get the cargo. They weren't paid necessarily. They weren't on the payroll of the king. They were private, and they had a commission, and they could keep the booty. Whatever they got, they could sell it. Okay, remember I said it's like the police officers, right? They don't get paid from the government per se, but they might, confiscate drugs and automobiles and things like that in the drug trade. And guess what they do? They auction that stuff off. You see what I'm saying? So they get paid by doing it that way, not from the king. And that's the same thing as the privateers. And the privateers were hired by the merchants. You picking up what I'm putting down? Hopefully that's connecting. Let's keep going. You'll get more understanding, more context here shortly. This is, I contend, the same. It's the same hag in a new dress is my point. This is the same thing that's happening now. Okay, I'll develop that. During the last colonial war, once again with France, the merchants of New York were playing both ends against the middle. On the one hand, they were trading illegally with the French, ostensibly their enemy. This trade was so intense that Lieutenant Governor Delancey could write, "The French at Louisborough are furnished with provisions from this and some other northern colonies." They were supplying the enemy. This is what those merchant class, those privateers were doing. Look, the French at Louisborough are furnished with provisions from this and some other northern colonies, where they supply Canada and their forces on the Ohio, and are thereby in a condition to support themselves in their encroachments on His Majesty's territories. Needless to say, let me ask you a question. Does this right here sound like, you know how people say, you know, they're leery about hiring the public defender? Because you'd be like, well, the public defender is a bar member. It seems like they're working both sides. If they're claiming they're going to help you, but they're also bar members and their allegiance is first to the bar, then how can they help me? Why would I trust them? You see this, right? You kind of could see, you know, how, the claim is that they were working both sides. These merchants, these law merchants, working both sides and obtaining profits through their private businesses. All right, I'm gonna just keep going. Needless to say, supplying a war machine, here it is. This is why that slump it talked about in their economy, there was a slump because the war had ended. The drastic economic decline after much prosperity during the French and Indian War. This business slump, although mostly the result of an economy that had been crippled by the close of the war with France. Remember we read that? Okay, so they go into it a little bit here. Look at this slump. Needless to say, see, this is it right here. Supplying a war machine was a very profitable enterprise for the New York merchants. See, they were supplying both sides of the war, the enemy as well as Great Britain, as privateers, merchants. So they were enriched during wartime. But when wars subside, the war machine no longer is pumping out, then the economy slumps. Sound a lot like the United States of America? Why do you think they push us to war so much? Why do you think the war machine, the drums of war are always being beat, especially around election time? Uh-oh, Roy. You see? And this is why I am stating, this is why we did the show. We're doing the show today. Because if you don't understand the history, it's doomed to repeat. And this is why nothing changes. Every 4 years, we vote in somebody making promises, and the same thing, the same actions are taken, the same results. All right? A nation that forgets their history, it's doomed to repeat it. That's the bottom line. That's what we're talking about here today. Let me look at the comment section, see if anybody's talking about anything before we proceed. I learned a lot from the Hunger Games, moves and counter moves. America is the Hunger Games capital of the world. Very good, Blue Marvel. Blue Marvel says politics is the art and science of power, leverage, and influence, aka the art of the kingmaker. All right. Very good. I like that series of movies, The Kingsman. Yes. Very eye-opening, informative, just like John Wick. Yes. Let us continue. All right. Where were we at? Hold on. We had left off on the bottom of here. Needless to say, talking about the war machine was a very profitable enterprise for the New York merchants. That's the Delancey side. Recall and remember. However, their prosperity was based on more than just smuggling, trafficking. Side by side with the illegal French trade, the merchants were sending privateers. Listen, y'all. Listen. You know how they say, you can't, you trust an attorney or whatever like that, a lawyer or whatever. You know how they said. Listen, why? Side by side with the illegal French trade, not only were they illegally trading with the enemy, the merchants were sending privateers to interfere with supplies going to the French armies. What? What dishonor. This merchant class was smuggling, they were doing an illegal trade with the enemies of Great Britain. Then they would send out privateers to interfere, meaning basically to pirate the supplies that they sent to the French. They'd go and rob them. They'd supply them, and then they would hire privateers to go and rob the French armies of the supplies that they just gave them. That's why I said they were playing both sides. And that's how the merchants became so insanely wealthy. Sound like the legal practitioners? Sounds like the legal order? Huh? Public defenders? Oh boy. This is not to say that New Yorkers' sentiment were divided between the two warring parties. Which warring parties? The French and Great Britain. Many of the same merchant captains and crews who were involved in privateering were also smuggling. The result of these circumstances was a high level of prosperity for the merchants. They got it by any means necessary. These are your merchant class. Delancey ilk, the family in its ilk. The radicals. By any means necessary. Cheat, steal, whatever. Who were often paid a percentage of the prize that the privateers had captured. They were taking they were getting their take from the underhandedness of the privateers whom they hired to go and rob those they supplied with products. The scripture says it best. Woe unto ye lawyers. Uh-oh. Stop stepping on their toes. Listen, and it offered employment directly or indirectly to thousands of New Yorkers. Among the privateering captains were Isaac Sears. Is that where we get Sears Roebuck? And Alexander McDougall. These are okay, listen. These are privateering captains. Sears was, in fact, both a smuggler and a privateer. He was doubly underhanded. Both men were not only acquiring personal fortunes, but they were also winning the allegiance of their crews. It was this alliance between captains, McDougall and Sears, right, and loyal crews that was to become the strength behind the union of the rioters and their street leaders. These were those captains, remember? During the Stamp Act crisis. That's how they built up their coup. All right. Joseph Henson is in the building. Thanks for being here. 777. I feel myself getting stronger. A second kind of alliance was also developing during this period. Not only were the sailors and captains' interests being united, but the interests of the ship's captains were also beginning to be tied to specific factions in New York politics. Isaac Sears' link with the Delanceys was economic. In fact, his fortune was made with their patronage, the Delancey patronage. So you're starting to see the sides form. Remember, these privateers were underhanded. That's how they gained their wealth. Funding both sides of the war. Oh my God, does not sound like what we got going on here today. Huh? Who was funding the Taliban and all that kind of stuff? Or Al Qaeda? Huh? Watch out now. It was Lieutenant Governor Delancey who commissioned Captain Sears as a privateer in 1757, talking about Daddy Delancey, right? Remember, he perished, he died in 1760. So it says he was the one that commissioned Captain Sears, that privateer, that underhanded individual. Huh? As a privateer, okay? Most of the rest of Isaac Sears' commands came on ships owned by General Beekman, a Delancey ally. The sides are forming. Those factions are forming. Which one were you a part of? Or, which one would you be a part of? This is that political divide that we are now experiencing. This is the root. This is where it came from. Better pay attention. A nation that forgets their history is doomed. Meanwhile, Alexander McDougall was moving toward the Livingston faction. Here's the split. Here comes the split. Remember, both were privateers. Both were commissioned by England, the king. Y'all better hold on. I'm about to show y'all something. The game, two wings of the same bird. Where did it start? You're looking at the split. Remember, Sears and McDougall were both privateers, both underhanded individuals in the merchant class, funding both sides of the war between Great Britain and France. And it says that Captain Sears was commissioned by the Delancey side, and McDougall went more on the Livingston side, the Livingston faction. You see that divide? Okay, stay tuned. Here, flipping the page on history. Here, the link is more difficult to find, but it may rest on his religious background. Wait a minute. Who are we talking about? Let's keep it in context. We're talking about McDougall. So the link to the Livingstons, they're saying, is more difficult to find, but it may rest on his religious background. Does anybody recall and remember what was the religious background of the Livingstons? Was it Anglican or was it Presbyterian? Put it in the comment section. Let's see who gets it right. We'll see if we can get a reward out for paying attention. The question, the Livingston, what was their religious background? We covered it earlier in the broadcast. Were they Anglican or Presbyterian? No cheating. Looking for the first answer. All right. Roger Champagne, in his book about McDougall, argues that he, quote, imbibed his parents' habits of piety, which lasted throughout his life. And McDougall, quote, McDougall undoubtedly came to know all four: Robert R. Livingston, William Livingston, John Moran Scott, and William Smith, Jr., by way of a common interest in the affairs of the Wall Street. Oops. All right, Blue Marvel got it first. BB Production will come up with a gift for that correct answer, as you see here. You probably read ahead, didn't you? But that's all right. There's nothing wrong with being wise. All right, so Blue Marvel got that answer correct. It is Presbyterian. That was the Livingstons' religious background, under which McDougall, they're saying it might be the reason why McDougall linked with the Livingstons. All right, very good. Thank you for your participation, Blue Marvel 9. So, moving on. By way of a common interest in the affairs of the Wall Street Presbyterian Church, to which they all belong. So we're making those distinctions between the two factions. Remember and recall, that is very vital and very important, because that leads us into the present day, 2024, political realm. All right. Unfortunately for all concerned, peace came in 1763. Imagine that. Why would they say unfortunately for all concerned, peace came in 1763? Right. Because remember, oh, Copper G, you hit it on the head. You hit it on the head. That's exactly the term I was looking for. The privateers were mercenaries. Very good. Thank you. I don't know why that escaped me, but you can see mercantilism in the term. These were merchants, mercenaries, private groups hired to go and fund both sides of the war, to steal, well, not to go and per se fund both sides of the war, but to basically steal from those that they supply. They would supply merchandise to the French and then turn around and go and steal it back. That merchant class, the law merchant, the mercenaries. Exactly. Thank you for that, Copper G. Thank you. All right. But why would they say, unfortunately for all concerned, peace came in 1763? Because remember and recall, we stated that the war machine was big business, big profits. Is that any different from today? Why do we always go to war, or there's rumors of wars around election time? Ain't nothing changed, y'all. But a nation that forgets their history is doomed to repeat it. Reading on. Following the end of fighting and the withdrawal of the French from the American continent, the highly lucrative trade which had helped to supply the French colonial army ceased. Profits from privateering also fell off. Why? Because the French colonial needs and supplies ceased. So they didn't need the privateers, the merchant class, to supply them. So therefore, the profits for the privateers fell off too. All adding to the depressed economy in New York. The end of the war also led to a reawakening of England's interest. In where? In the colonies, New York, and Boston. So now England focused its attention back on the colonies. Their interest was reawakened because they were not warring with France anymore. So let me get this straight. New York, the colonies, Boston, are flourishing during the wartime because there's big profits in war. But the end of that war between Great Britain and the French, okay, now England could go back to taxation and focusing on legislating and whatever over the colonies. Not only that, but the colonies were no longer uber profitable and had a depressed economy at the same time. This is no different than what we deal with today, y'all. That history is repeating itself. And you really believe, hold on, and you really believe that there was no underhandedness, that the king was not involved in this pump and dump of the economy, just like the pump and dump of the stock market today, pressing a button, flooding into the markets, right? Affecting the cause and the demand and supply, volatility in the markets. What? Listen, the colony. I'm trying to make this as simple as I can. All right, listen. Follow the ladder of logic here, and see if this is testamentary of today in our political realm. This is politics, the study of how to control your mind and your head. Listen, look how it goes. As long as there is war, the colonies are making big profits, big money. The merchant class, the landed gentry. This same colony is allegedly defecting from and trying to separate from the king, Great Britain, England, right? So, wouldn't it be in the interest of the king to end the war? Because then that would basically cause a slump in the economy of the separating colonists or American colonies. It would slump their economy. And then once the economy slumps, what would they do? Then the king would focus its attention in levying greater taxation, the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and what have you, upon the colonies. And if the king can levy taxation, heavy taxation upon the colonies, that means that's more profits, that's more revenue to the king itself. Are you seeing the intertwining, the serpentry, as it were? That's politics. It's all a game. It's a pump and dump scheme. And the same thing is being played on you today. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Let's get back. You better stop it. You better stop it. Let's get back. Let me behave. Looking at the comment section. Blue Marvel 9 says privateer is a mercenaries, pirates for royalty and the oligarchy. Correct. You see, you send out the mercenaries in order to stabilize and destabilize the colonies. Dun, dun, dun. But they play both sides. BB Production says history repeats itself. Yeah, you know why? Because the king is still in control. The king is still in control. So, of course, history repeats itself. Who is the his in the story? History? The king, the ruler. It's his story. You remember what we used to say back in the day? It's your story, and I'm going to let you tell it. Yeah, it's his story. That's why it seems to repeat itself. Because why would I fix it if it ain't broke? Why would I change my tactics if it continues to work? Just saying. All right, let's get back to it. Is this good? 777 in the comment section. If this is informing, opening your eyes to the current situations, political and otherwise, in the great United States. Anyways, so unfortunately, because of the lack of the war machine, okay, everybody was sad now because peace had come. Following the ends of, that reminds me, the scripture says, when they cry, peace, 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 then shall come sudden destruction. Are you seeing why now? Are you seeing why now? Peace, peace, peace affects economies. It causes a slump in the economies. That's not a good thing. We need revenue. So when you cry peace, 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 we're going to bring wars so that we can stoke the flames of revenue or bring on more greater revenue. Yeah, well, you know, we want the people, we'll push the people to a certain point where they're so inundated with tumult, right? Where they're so fearful that they'll begin to cry peace, peace, peace. And when they start doing that, that's when we're going to enact wars and rumors of wars. Why? Because it's big money, baby. It's big money. That's the way it works. It ain't changed. Why would they change it if the American people haven't woke up to it yet? Dun, dun, dun. All right, listen. Following the end of fighting and the withdrawal of the French from the American continent, the highly lucrative trade, bing, which had helped to supply the French colonial army, ceased. That's that privateering. the merchant class. Profits from privateering also fell off, all adding to the depressed economy. You don't think the king had a hand in that? I tell you what, yeah, I could just see it right now. I'm sorry, I can't go past this point right here because I could just see it. I see the underhandedness. I see the underhandedness. Check it out. Why wouldn't the king be having diplomatic discussions with the French, in the background, yeah, going through a tunnel somewhere underground and going over to meet with the prime minister or president of France or whatever. And, they're sitting there sipping their tea or whatever. And they're like, yeah, you know what? This is chess, not checkers. Why don't we just settle this? Why don't we just, cool off the flames of war between us? And what's going to happen is you're no longer going to need the supplies. So that's good for you. You don't have that great expense, whatever, for war expenses and whatever. And not only that, but then privateering will slump off. You won't need that. Then the colonies, their economy will slump off. I can levy greater taxation against the colonies, right? Because they're trying to separate from us anyways. Right? So, yeah. So you see where I'm going with this? Those backdoor dealings. Why does Trump go over to meet with Russian president? Why do these presidents meet behind closed doors? You're not allowed to be in that meeting. You don't know what they're talking about, right? Can you see this? Can you see this? All right, let's get back to it. Yeah, it all affects the economies. The economies of the separatists, or whatever they call it, separate the colonies, the American colonies. You trying to run away from the rulership of the king. You don't like my taxations and all that kind of stuff. I got something for you. I'll make you think you're winning when in fact I am pulling the puppet strings behind closed doors the whole time. Oh, enjoy your little separation. Go on over there and enjoy the Americas. You go. But I guess what? But guess what? While you over there establishing your colonies and your plantations, your landed gentry, while you're doing all that, I'm gonna be coming behind you and getting my taxes. Yeah. Joseph Henson says 777. I feel myself getting stronger. Kimberly Miller says, the good part is there has to also be a remedy, yin and yang. I'm tracking. We're going to be discussing that at 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. How long have we been on? An hour and 48 minutes? All right. I got to get ready for our Zoom meeting. You are cordially invited if you are picking up what we're putting down here. If you're done with all the riffraff, all of the other gurus and what have you that are teaching this erroneous teachings that are getting nobody remedy. I participated this weekend a bit in some of the TikTok platforms and what have you, and just sitting back and listening. I've even joined into a couple to assert some truths, hopefully staving away that erroneous information from harming other people. But alas, people have itching ears. They want to hear what they want to hear. And even when you present them with facts or whatever, there's an argument. I'm not in it for arguing. I mean, I can debate you and we can do that. But all this TikToking, if you can't present facts, hard letter, black and white letter facts and things with reputable sourcing and citations, all you're doing is talking. You're not proving anything. And I think that's a great problem. And it's doing a great disservice to us today, and it's going to do an even greater disservice to our future. All right? Stop going after these erroneous applications of things that have no legal interest, no legally protectable interest. You must work within the jurisdiction of the law in order to get your remedy. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you are interested in joining us, you can go to our KnowledgeWell for you at gmail.com and simply put that you are interested in joining for the Zoom today at 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. All right, to be inducted into that educational event. All right, we'll be talking a little bit about remedy. and how to properly use these artificial persons to your benefit, legally and with a legally protectable interest. Hands down. There is no refuting of these things. You have a seat at the table if you learn how to play the game the correct way. Read the rules, read the instructions, which few Americans are doing nowadays. We just crack it open and get to working with it, right? How many of you read the manual for your cell phone? How many of you have read the manual to the new TV that you just bought, the 4K, whatever TV you just bought? Did you ever sit down and read that manual cover to cover? What's the problem here? Do we even read the manual to our automobiles? What's the problem here? I got 12 people watching. I got 9 thumbs up. Can we balance that off, please? If you enjoy our time here, if you find value in it, please do us a solid and just hit that thumbs up button. We are only getting warmed up, but I am going to get off of here in short order because I have to prepare for our 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time Zoom meeting. If you are interested in being part of that, even if you missed the live, and you can send us a message to our knowledgewell4u@gmail.com, and we can send you a link to join us. But only the serious need apply. Okay, only the serious need apply. We're not doing any riffraff. Okay, all right. With that being said, and that door will be closing. So that is our arc, and that door will be closing, and we will deal with the first round of individuals who express that interest, all right, and that are serious and apply themselves, not looking for a handout, right, but maybe a hand up in information knowledge. We will be closing that door, and we'll be going forward with the disciples that we have. I'll just put it that way, okay? And then you'll have to wait till whenever we start a new session, because I'm not going to take away, as Yeshua said, from the children, and give to, aka they use the term dog, but you have to understand and decode what they really mean. We're not calling humans dogs. That's not the point. All right. Talking about the Gentiles, the non-believers. You didn't apply yourself. Okay. You weren't hungry for the knowledge. That's what we're talking about. Okay. So we're only going with those who express their interest in the first instance. Do not be lazy. Jump in while the water is stirred. BB Production says, balance of power. All right. Joseph Henson says, I got some devices watching which can not give thumbs up. That's okay. No problem. I appreciate your want. It's more important. Okay. Yeah. So hit us up at that knowledgewell4u@gmail.com if you, again, want to join us. I'll read a little bit more, and then we got to get going here because I got to get a bite to eat. I haven't had breakfast yet, and then I got to get prepared for my 2:30. Our 2:30. All right. So let's just read a little bit more. Hopefully you're picking up what we're putting down here. This is very vital, very important. Okay, so the captains and merchants were also hurt. Oh, let's go back up here. All sectors of the city were affected. Oh, no. Lucrative trade, which had helped to supply the French. Okay. The end of the war also, led to a reawakening of England's interest in mercantilism and colonial trade. One sign of this new interest was the Sugar Act. Oh, here comes the king. Here comes the king. Now that the war is over, I'm going to focus back on the colony and start, enacting sugar acts and more acts that affect mercantilism and colonial trade. Here I come. Here comes the king again. What was the Sugar Act? This legislation was actually a restatement of earlier laws. Both the tax on sugar and the illegality of paying the tax with paper money were drawn from past regulations. Still, the act came at a bad time. Doesn't extra taxation always come at a bad time? Like right now, when our economy is slumped over, nearly dead, the value of our dollar is dwindled upwards of 98%. Inflation, uber inflation, and guess what? That's when the king is going to enact more taxation. Wouldn't you know it? A nation that forgets their history is doomed to repeat it. All right. Still, the act came at a bad time since New Yorkers and almost none of the, had almost none of the specie needed by law to pay these duties. Remember, they said that the illegality of paying the tax with paper money. The king didn't even want your paper money, your fiat currency. No. And so New Yorkers didn't have the specie needed by law to pay these duties. You think the king didn't know that? You think the king didn't know that the New Yorkers didn't even have the species that the king required to pay the tax? You think he didn't know that? Does this sound a lot like us today? Oh my goodness. Let's keep going. Besides, any new duty during a period of declining economic opportunity was an added burden which most of the city's inhabitants would not bear. All sectors of the city were affected. Many sailors found themselves out of work as the level of commercial activity fell off. You think the king didn't have a hand in this? This also affected all those working in related industries, a good portion of the city's population. The captains and merchants were also hurt as their profits declined and their debts increased. When the news of the stamp tax arrived in New York in 1765, these underlying hostilities surfaced. The Sons of Liberty, here it is, came into existence, an all-out effort to rid the colony of this latest parliamentary, turning the page on history, action began. All right, so this is when the Sons of Liberty really got active. Yet, even during this high mark of radical activity, the New York resistors began to show signs of the divisiveness. I'm going to hit you real hard over the head, y'all, so that y'all can get this understanding. There is more than meets the eye. This is politics 101. Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a purpose, and the king is in the know at all times. I'm going to show you. A nation that forgets its history is doomed. Listen. Yet even during this high mark of radical activity, talking about the Sons of Liberty, who hated the fact that all these taxations were being leveled against the colonies, the New York and what have you, in the midst of a declining economy already because the wars had ended. Look, the New York resistors began to show signs of divisiveness. So even within the eternal ranks, all of a sudden the political divide came to the forefront, meaning the Delancey and the Livingston factions began to internally fight during the time that they were supposed to be radically active against the acts levied upon them collectively by the king. Internal divisiveness. Somebody was working, somebody was a mole inside of the factions. Sympathizers to the king, was instituting and causing divisiveness. A type of what's that Roman horse or the horse? The Trojan horse. There was a mole in there causing divisiveness when they should have been focusing on in their radical activity against the legislation or the enactments of these stamp acts. Sound a lot like today? Listen. Signs of divisiveness that would later stall their radicalism. It put their radicalism out because they were too focused on each other internally, fighting internally. Listen, near the end of the year, the Liberty Boys, that's the Sons of Liberty, split into two distinct factions. Divided, we fall. United, we stand. You may as well put blacks and whites here. You might as well put male versus female here. Any form of divisiveness that you can choose from. This will split you in two. Alternatively, look at it from this standpoint. How are we distinguished from each other? How are factions formed? It's when internal divisiveness is enacted. It's when the leaders, the authorities, are able to implant moles and Trojan horses amongst the people and get them to look at their differences instead of their unity. And as a result, we're torn into distinct factions, which will then end our radicalism, as it's stated, which protects we the people. The governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? So these two factions were now formed due to the divisiveness. The very agency or liberty, the Sons of Liberty that were there, to basically keep the king at bay, ended up getting split into two distinct factions. One faction following Alexander McDougall and the Livingston, and the other following James Delancey Jr. and the street leadership of Isaac Sears. Basically, this is your political divide. Your Republicans and your Democrats, the Delanceys and the Livingstons, the mercantile class against the land gentry class. Are you picking up what I just put down? Listen, this split was ostensibly caused by friction between radical and moderate elements within the organization. What organization? The Sons of Liberty. You see how liberty has been decimated? Liberty has become decimated because we don't realize who the real quote unquote adversary, I won't say enemy, I don't like using that term because it's not. It's an adversarial type of consideration. It's a rivalry. This split was ostensibly caused by friction between radical, or your Democrat, and moderate, your Republican, conservative, whatever you want to say, elements within one organization. They were supposed to be one organization, the Liberty Boys, the Sons of Liberty. They got split into two because they were looking over here at the divisiveness and the tactics between, into present day, your gender, your race. You see, we are supposed to be one people, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have lost it. We have lost it. We are no longer one and indivisible. Now we are split into many different factions of people. Yet, given the earlier attachment of crews to captains and captains to the leadership of the political factions, this split becomes less of a surprise. The unusual situation was the union of these forces rather than their later division. With the strong partisanship and its accompanying hostilities, the alliance of both factions at the beginning of the Stamp Act crisis must have been the result of the very special circumstances caused by deep economic decline. But because of that strong factionalism, it was a union that could not be expected to last long. With the repeal of the stamp tax, New York's partisan feuding came into full bloom. Sears moved almost immediately to use his influence with the Sons of Liberty locally on behalf of the politically ambitious James Delancey. That's the merchant class. So Sears is heading up a movement on behalf of James Delancey. He moved immediately upon the repeal of the Stamp Tax Act. He coveted election to the Assembly. The Delanceys were intent on winning control of the assembly through the electoral process. There's your electoral process. When the inhabitants voted in 1768. Towards this end, they employed the connections they had made in 1765 and 1766. Who can tell me what other significant issue that we have covered here in the last couple of weeks took place 1765? First answer wins. We've covered it the last couple of weeks. What other significant historical event took place 1765? I should say, what was produced, not necessarily an event. There was something that was produced we covered for the last few weeks in 1765 at this same point in time. First answer wins. Toward this, once again, end, they employed the connection they had made in 1765 and 1766. The major issue of the election quickly became the Delancey support of the radical Sons of Liberty during the Stamp Act controversy against the more moderate approach of the Livingstons, which seemed like non-support. So here's where they're going to highlight these two factions that were formed out of the divisiveness, I contend, brought on by the king in Great Britain. Okay? These two factions separated out of the Sons of Liberty. And so now the people of the colony are going to have to choose between what faction, what family they're going to align themselves with, either the Delanceys or the Livingstons, the mercantile class, the merchants, okay, or the land gentry. Now would come the American divide, finally. The same divide we have today. Two wings of the same bird, you say? The Republicans and the Democrats, the moderates and the radicals, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So now the choice is going to be posed to the people. We got a few more minutes. We got to get off here. I got to go eat. I'm hungry. All right, here we go. Incorrect. It is not tax. 1765. We covered this the last couple weeks. I'll give you a clue. Should I give you a clue? I'll wait for a moment. If nobody gets it, I'll give a clue. Let's get back. So two factions were formed, okay? And basically, it is time to now look back, in fact, at who was actually against the Stamp Act that was levied on the colonies by the King of England, right? Who was with more moderate when it comes to controverting the Tax Act, and who was like more radical. And so this is the major issue of the election to the assembly, right? Which it says Sears was looking forward to becoming the head of the assembly. The major issue quickly became Delancey's support of the radical Sons of Liberty, meaning totally against the tax. They were more radical during the Stamp Act controversy against the more moderate, which is the Livingstons approach, which basically it seemed like they did not support the Sons of Liberty against that Tax Act. You see how they're going to try to form greater divisiveness? So now it's time to campaign. Sears is now going to start going on the campaign trail and pointing to the Livingston faction and saying, see, they were not necessarily supporting the Sons of Liberty. They were more moderate. Whereas we, the Delanceys, were saying ixnay on the British control and taxation of the colony. That's what was happening. They were about to start campaigning to the colonies to see who would win the seat of the head of the assembly. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? So much like we're dealing with today, they're about to go on the campaign trail. Okay. The street leaders, with their influence over the general populace, became the key individuals in this debate. Remember, these are those captains, the merchant class. They had the greater influence over the general populace at that time. So they became the key individuals in the debate that Sears is going to bring. The Livingstons, turning the page on history, were well aware of the great liability this new issue was to their own political success. As early as the middle of 1766, William Smith Jr., a Livingston lawyer, conceded, quote, James Delancey would probably get into the assembly now as he was among the Sons of Liberty. They're campaigning. Because they feared a resurgence of the Delancey's power in the assembly resulting from this new popular support, the Livingston Party began to use their own street leader, Alexander McDougall, in hopes of winning back some of the support they had lost. McDougall billed himself as a quote-unquote son of liberty. So trying to remind the people, hey, I'm one of them too. We're moderate, but I'm still a son of liberty. And began to look for support among his friends and followers. However, his efforts were too little avail as the Delanceys cut deeply into the Livingston's assembly majority, greatly decreasing it. Isaac Sears was rewarded for his efforts by being appointed potash inspector, a lucrative position created especially for him. The tenure of this assembly was to be a short one. Soon after they were seated, they entered a set of constitutional resolves on their minutes asserting their rights in pretty full but clear terms. This action resulted in Royal Governor Moore dissolving the assembly and calling for a new election. The second campaign was much the same as the result. As the first. It resulted in an even stronger Delancey victory. So the Delancey, the radicals, the merchant class, they continued to win. They were the party in control, that faction, displacing a number of Livingston supporters and gaining for the Delanceys the assembly control they had strived for. So they had won. The electoral success was the culmination of the Delanceys' well-planned strategy for uniting their interests with those of the radicals to achieve a specific goal: assembly control. Immediately following this victory, the Delanceys began to, turning the page on history, seek the benefits of such control. The Livingston lawyer William Smith Jr. observed that, quote, the Delanceys deserted the cause of liberty and aimed to make fair weather by gradually listing on the side of prerogative, meaning their own ambitions, their own prerogative. They soon abandoned the cause of liberty for which they had campaigned. Isn't that how politics operates today? You vote them in after they make all these promises, and once they're in, what happens? What happens? They desert the cause that they stated, and they aim more on their prerogative, meaning their own agenda. Al Gore, right? In the global warming and all that. He used his platform to do that once he got in as a Democrat. I believe it. Yeah, Democrat. That's true to politics today. Ain't nothing changed. A nation that forgets their history is doomed to repeat it. They had returned to the place of political prestige and patronage, which the Delanceys had lost in 1760. Right? Back when Delancey, the senior, had died. Doesn't it sound like the Bush family almost? Like, you know, Daddy Bush dies and then the son takes over and what have you. All right, never mind. The Delancey's apparent shift away from the Sons of Liberty, see, they got in running on this, that they were against the king and his taxation. But they shifted away once they were in power. Politics 101, baby. To a more loyalist posture. Loyal to who? The king. To England. You see how politics is really playing you, the people? They do what they need to do to get in, and then they shift away from what they ran on, what they campaigned on, is what they're saying. And this was happening back in the 1700s. The United States was established in its Constitution 1789. This is even before that even took place. 20 years prior, and they were still playing the same political games back then. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? See, they were really loyalists to the king the whole time. But they played as if they were against the king and with the Sons of Liberty, the mob that was formed in New York. When the people were acting as one, together, in unity against the heavy legislative hand of the government or the king. You see how that's working? Listen. So they switched back to their a loyalist posture to the king, reached its culmination. Okay, the assembly under James Delancey Jr.'s control voted funds to pay for the quartering of British troops in America in compliance with Parliament's Quartering Act. Look, once they came to power, then they voted that they should, that the colonies should pay for the quartering of British troops in America. See how they switched on the colony, the people of the colony? Fooled you. Fooled you. You fell for the political game. We play it on you all the time. All we got to do is tell you what you want to hear. And then once we get, inducted, then we'll switch back to our loyalist posture to the government, to the king. And then we're going to enact, these tax acts and things that, that the king wanted all along. You see? We slipped you the okie doke, American people, American colony. That's what they're saying. So yeah, you're going to quarter the British troops in your colonies. We got you all along. All we had to do is soften you up a little bit, think we were on your side. You picking up what I'm putting down? British troops in America in compliance. They went into compliance with the king and his tax acts. That means that it caused the people in the colonies to also be compliant with Parliament. You see how that works? Be careful who you vote in. Be careful when you participate. If you don't know what's really going on, this is chess, not checkers. The Livingston-controlled assembly had failed to deal with the Quartering Act since 1765 when Parliament enacted it. It was, in fact, this reluctance to support British troops that led to the suspension of the assembly in 1767. Reading on. But did the assembly's funding bill actually represent a change in attitude by the Delanceys, or were there other reasons which caused that faction to favor such legislation? If one approaches this question from the perspective of political expediency, that is the desire of the Delancey faction to maintain control of New York's politics, some answers begin to appear. It has already been noted that the election of 1769 returned the Delancey faction to power, which it had lost when James Sr. died in 1760. In the intervening years, the major force behind the factional activities was the Delanceys' attempt to regain their eminence. They were the first to use the political power controlled by the street leaders, those captains, remember? They were the first to use it. They were the first to use the political power controlled by the street leaders, which emerged from the activities of the Sons of Liberty during the Stamp Act crisis. The cultivation of the power eventually gave them enough popular support to control the provincial assembly. Even the passage of the resolves, which led to the disposition of the assembly in early 1769, can be viewed from this perspective. It, turning the page on history, almost there, y'all. Oh boy, I got it. Maybe we're gonna have to do a part two. It has been noted earlier that despite gains in the election of 1768, the Delancey were still the minority party. They could have backed the resolves, hoping that Governor Moore would indeed call for new elections. These second elections became the final step in the Delancey struggle for ascendancy. The result of that ballot put the Delancey party in firm control of the colonial assembly, and with it came the provincial political leadership they had sought. What then of the funding of the Quartering Act? Did the Delanceys not realize that this would probably result in the loss of some of the popular support gained over the previous 5 years? One observer, Peter Van Schenk, suggested that such considerations were not as important as an effort to keep this assembly from also being dissolved. This would seem to be a natural concern for a faction which has just spent 9 years trying to regain political leadership. In other words, they were more concerned about the power. Okay, than about how they would look by promising basically to go against the taxes, right, and being sympathizer to the king, okay, and becoming loyalists. They were less concerned about that. They just wanted the power. I wanted the power, money, and okay. The interests of the Livingston also centered around provincial political control. However, as the party in power in 1765, they had little need to seek new constituents. Only after they realized the power that their opponents had won did they begin to use their street leader, Alex McDougall, in hopes of building a popular base for themselves. It was not until 1770 that the Livingston started to receive some of that popular support. As the result of the funding of the Quartering Act and the arrest, trial, and imprisonment of McDougall. Oh, look at that. Resulting from his journalistic attacks on the Delancey-controlled assembly's action. So I would say that would be like today, the violation of the First Amendment, right? The right to speech or whatever, right? So instead, McDougall ended up getting arrested, okay, for his journalistic attacks on the Delancey-controlled assembly. Okay, the events. Okay, I'm gonna read this last paragraph and then I'm gonna go get a bite to eat. Joseph is saying, "Go eat." All right, thanks, Joseph. I'll do that. Let me just finish this. The events of late 1769 and early 1770 had a cataclysmic event on the Sons of Liberty. Immediately after the funding of the Quartering Act, the Livingstons began to trying to attract the street leaders who had, turning the page on history, formerly been allied with the Delancey. So there's going to be a shift change, basically, where people are going to start to pick sides once again. Politics rules the day, and that's what it comes down to. So basically, you should be able now to see kind of how the politics that you are experiencing today came about through these factions who were once working in unity as the Sons of Liberty, right, in New York, and basically as the colonies working as one, and they kept getting hit with all of these different taxes by England, all right, by the king. And essentially, they didn't like that, obviously. All right, but you could see the effects of war and the ending of war upon the colonies, where the economy declines when wars are over, right? The war machine brings lots of profits and what have you. And remember, the colonies are considered to be separating from the King of England. And so wouldn't it be conducive for the King of England to end the war with France in order to essentially kill or slump the economy of the colony. At the same time, they can pump and dump, right? Because if they cause the war, then the economies flourish. If they participate in the war, if they do not, then they slump the economy of the economy of the colonists. Okay, so you can see the pump and dump, just like the stock market. That's what you're seeing today in the stock market. All that volatility. Somebody's pushing those buttons. Somebody's buying in or putting in, dumping in large amounts of currency, and then they will pull it out. Okay, and that will determine your behaviors as to whether it's time to invest or not invest. That's the pump and dump scheme. Politics. And so you got these factions that end up separating, that come out of that union, Sons of Liberty, and then they separate. Delancey's go one way under the Delancey, the Delanceys go one way under Sears, I believe it was, and the Livingstons go the opposite way under McDougal. Okay, so there's your Democrat, your Republicans. Just keep that in mind. We will continue on this study. This is very vital and very important, because a nation that forgets their history is doomed to repeat it. All right. And so we next, in about an hour, have our Zoom meeting, our private Zoom meeting, which I've invited everybody that is attending here today to. You do not really want to miss it. But, you know, I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make you drink. All right. And so we are going to discuss remedy, going to how to operate in light of all these political dealings and what have you, how to mitigate, how to operate as the great fathers, I'll say, did before us, the Rothschild, the Rockefellers, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. You want to learn those ins and outs. Let's discuss that today. But we're going to do it in the private, because we're going to be putting out some heavy hitters. Okay. And it's not for everybody. And our goal is not to delegitimize. This is what happens when I don't eat. I got to go eat. Okay. Blood sugar drops way low. This is what happens when you This is what happens when ignorance is not bliss. I'll just say that. And if you don't know your rights, you have none. Okay. And so we need to understand the rules to the game, not delegitimize the game, but understand the rules to it. And then you can have a seat at the table and you can play this game and hopefully win at the game called life. All right. With that being said, I'm going to let you go now. And now you've been made free. The question is, what are you going to do with it? All right. We hopefully will see you all over at the Zoom link. All right. And we'll see. I'll go get something to eat so I can get back fresh. Okay. Bear with me. All right. Bear with me. Tiger with me. Whatever. Love you all. Getting silly. Need to eat. Okay. So everybody that is going to be joining us over there, you should have by now, hopefully, gone over to knowledgewell4you@gmail.com. And then we will be sending you the Zoom link so that you can join us. All right. If you are just now seeing this, you better hurry up. We're starting at 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll see you soon. Peace.